Good morning. I'd like to make a simple request. First of all, we're delighted to be here, but if you will turn off your cell phones, we would appreciate it. The short period of which we've been here, we've enjoyed seeing these beautiful surroundings. We will now call the hearing of the Subcommittee on Water Resources and Environment to order. And today we will receive testimony in regards to water resource contamination and environmental cleanup in the Hudson Valley region. The Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act of 1980, or Superfund, provides broad federal authority to respond to releases or threatened releases of hazardous substances, but may endanger public health or the environment. Former Senator Robert Safford, Republican from Vermont, and at one time the chairman of the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, described the need for Superfund legislation in the June 1981 EPA Journal when he wrote, "Together with the other members of the Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works, I worked on this legislation for nearly 3 years. 80% of the American people wanted some legislation. The Surgeon General of the United States considered toxic chemicals to pose a major threat to health in the United States, or the decade of the 1980s. Modern chemical technology has produced miracles and have greatly improved the nation's standard of living. But the increased generation of hazardous substances associated with these new products has proved to be a serious threat to our nation's public health and environment. The Superfund was enacted by Congress on December the 11th, 1980. Since March of 1980, TCE and TCA chemicals have been detected in a drinking water wells located on the Hopewell Precision property, which we will discuss today. Until 1983, operators disposed of dry cleaning waste in a well located adjacent to the establishment of the Brewster Well Field site, which we will also discuss today. The Superfund law was timely in the Hudson Valley, just as it is across the nation. A Native American proverb states, "We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children." He has brought, excuse me, this is an important idea that we should all keep in mind as we listen to today's testimony. While we are here to discuss the decontamination sites that through recent history have harmed our land, soil, and air, we must not simply focus on the Superfund cleanup program. We must also consider and have concern for the human health impacts that these sites have had on our communities and the problems that these sites can bring about in the future if not properly handled in a timely fashion. I'd like to thank Congressman Hall for bringing this subcommittee's attention the need for such a hearing. The Congressman has a long history of environmental activism, fighting for safe energy and environmental protection for the Hudson Valley long before he took a seat on this committee. He has brought his passion for these issues to us, using his expertise to raise awareness on the Water Resources and Environment Subcommittee and throughout the halls of Congress. I'd like also to welcome our witnesses here today. I look forward to hearing your testimony on the federal and state agency roles in addressing public health risks posed by the contamination sites in the Hudson Valley, as well as the adequacy of existing health standards currently to address these concerns. And before I yield to my colleague, the ranking member of the Subcommittee of Water Resources and Environment, I ask for unanimous consent to allow members 5 additional legislative days to submit statements to the record of this hearing. I now recognize our ranking member, Mr. Bozeman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It really is a pleasure to be here. I'm from the northwest part of Arkansas, and the way that the hills and the things around here are very, very similar to where I come from. It's a beautiful part of the country. As a newly appointed ranking member of this subcommittee, I am delighted to be here to learn firsthand about the important pollution issues here in the Hudson Valley. An important objective of the EPA Superfund is to protect human health from the risk of uncontrolled releases of hazardous substances like TCE. We must be sure that the dollars we spend for the Superfund program do indeed reduce the public health risk. EPA and the state of New York have clearly done a great deal here in the Hudson Valley to try to reduce human exposure to dangerous pollutants. The question remains, what are the next steps that need to be taken? We pass a lot of laws in Washington establishing and funding programs that we hope are doing some good for people. I think it is important for members of Congress to get out of Washington and out of our own congressional districts to see other areas of the country and to listen to citizens tell us what's working and what's not. So I've come here to listen, and I look forward to hearing from our witnesses who can share with us some real-world experiences with the Superfund program. I want to thank Representative Hall for bringing this issue to our attention and Chairwoman Johnson for holding this hearing, and I look forward to hearing from our witnesses. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bozeman. I'll now recognize Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to thank Chairwoman Johnson and Ranking Member Bozeman for traveling here when they could have spent last night in their own beds in Texas and Arkansas, respectively, and in their home districts today, so that we could hold this hearing and discuss the impact that pollution from Superfund sites is having on communities and on the health of our citizens in the Hudson Valley, and also thank our esteemed panels of witnesses for appearing to share our views. I'd like also at this time, if I may, Madam Chair, to ask a statement by Congressman Hinchey, who represents New York's 22nd Congressional District, to be entered into the record. And also there's a letter from Dutchess County Legislator Marge Horton, which I also would ask be entered into the record. And to acknowledge some local officials and staff, Taylor Palmer from Representative Nita Lowey's staff, Mike Russo from Representative Kirsten Gillibrand's staff, Bill McCabe, Dutchess County Legislator, Sandra Goldberg, Dutchess County Legislator, Steve Newhouse, Supervisor at Chester, and I know he's not on the witness list, I don't think so anyway, but Region 3 Director of DEC, New York State DEC, Willie Janeway. So in addition to those who are officially testifying today. I know there are a few more people who wanted to be in this hearing and could not attend. It's not every day that Congress steps out of the Beltway, as Mr. Bozeman said, but it's important that we do undertake a close and personal investigation of the challenges that we face. The Hudson Valley has been blessed with an abundance of water resources, sometimes in recent years too much water, but the commitment of local residents to protecting these resources is strong. In the 19th Congressional District, we are home to no less than 5 active sites on the Superfund's National Priority List, or NPL. You'll hear the initials NPL later. That's what it means. The sites on that list include the Carroll and Doobie sewage disposal in Port Jervis and Deer Park, the Napira chemical site in Hamptonburg, Brewster Wellfield in Brewster, and right here in East Fishkill, the Hopewell Precision site and the Shenandoah Road site. This list is reserved for sites throughout the country that are far and away the most hazardous and affect the worst of the worst. They create a public health risk and economic burden that can last for years and for generations, and we need to constantly examine what can be done to accelerate their cleanup. It's my hope that today's examination of these sites will provide us with some insight to take back to Washington and apply to the Superfund program as a whole, because what is happening here is directly related to the Superfund program on a national basis. The same pollutants, the same funding challenges, the same desire to accelerate cleanup are in evidence throughout the country. One of the most common threads among Superfund sites is the pollutant that is the main culprit right here, TCE, trichloroethylene, At the Hopewell Precision site, it was used in degreasing and then recklessly dumped into the ground, contaminating wells, creating vapor intrusion, and leaving a 1.5 mile long underground plume from the site. Contact with that chemical can have a number of serious health consequences, ranging from dizziness and headaches to cancer and kidney and liver damage. Citizens of the Hopewell area are not alone in having to deal with TCE. Since 2003, the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry indicated that TCE is present at 852 of the 1,430 NPL sites. It's almost 60% of the national priority list sites have TCE as one or as the main contaminant. Despite this widespread prevalence, EPA, our Environmental Protection Agency, has yet to move forward with a protective standard for TCE that would make it easier for communities to cope with the health threats of this pollution. I share the view of the National Academies of Science that there is ample evidence to move forward and have joined Congressman Hinchey in introducing the TCE Reduction Act to spur EPA action on the subject. I hope the record we established here today will forward that cause. I'm also looking forward to examining what the impact of EPA's decreasing investment in Superfund and growing reliance on U.S. Treasury revenues is having on cleanup progress. Although the original principle that the polluter pays is still present in Superfund's goal, the expiration of the taxes on polluting industries in 1995 has limited resources and placed a greater strain on the program. Since 2004, the program for cleanup has relied almost exclusively on you, the taxpayer. Those funds do not come from polluter tax dollars, they come from your pocket. This is not the way the Superfund law was intended or written. Faced with an increasingly tight financial climate, the Superfund program has begun to fall significantly behind needed levels on a national basis. Since fiscal year 02, funding has been consistently beneath where it should be, about $400 million below the annual need. Reviews within EPA have raised concern that the agency is not doing as well as it could in recovering costs from the responsible parties. When resources are not available, the cleanup suffers. The communities that are stuck with these toxic sites continue to be harmed. We as a government have to do better, and I'm hopeful that today's hearing will provide us with a deeper understanding of how we can move in that direction in the 19th District and around the country. And I thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And without objection, we'll enter into the record those documents recommended. We'll begin our testimony of the first panel, and what we'll do is hear from the three of you before questions begin. And you will comment in the order which you are listed, Ms. Hall, Mr. Hickman, and Mr. Deegan. We'll now hear Ms. Hall.
My name is Deborah Hall. For the past 7 years, my husband and I have lived above the plume of chlorinated solvent contamination emanating from the Hopewell Precision Plant here in Hopewell Junction, New York. I would like to thank Congressman Hall, Chairwoman Eddie Bernice Johnson of Texas, and Ranking Member Bozeman from Arkansas for coming to hear directly from people whose health and property are impacted by toxic contamination. I have 5 messages for you today. I would like to think that they're simple, but the EPA must promulgate a protective standard for trichloroethylene, one of the contaminants that polluted my private well as the air in my home. 5 parts per billion is no longer acceptable. We had hoped that the EPA would finalize its 2001 draft human health risk assessment, which found that TCE was 5 to 65 times as toxic as previously believed. In 2002, EPA Science Advisory Board conducted a generally positive peer review, but instead of finalizing the risk assessment, EPA bent to the wishes of federal polluting agencies and sent the question of the National Academy of Sciences to the National Academy of Sciences for a re-review. The Academy concluded that the evidence on carcinogenic risk and other health hazards from exposure to trichloroethylene has strengthened since 2001. and the committee recommends that federal agencies finalize their risk assessment with currently available data so that risk management decisions can be made expeditiously. Now we are told that there is so much new information about TCE, it would be best to do a completely new study. Stakeholders agree that more is being learned all the time, but we also know that the standard needs to be lowered. Our health and lives depend on it. A completely good report is going into the garbage instead of getting implemented. Instead of our families being protected by a more protective standard, we will now have to wait years for another study. This does not make any sense. It is like building a 4-lane bridge but never using it. Instead, it gets demolished because a 6-lane bridge is now needed. It just does not make any sense. Furthermore, EPA needs to finalize its 2002 vapor intrusion guidance using ideas from impacted communities as well as other experts. We believe that vapor mitigation units should be installed wherever volatile organic compounds are detected above outdoor air levels. It would be protective and cheaper in the long run since testing and mitigation usually cost about the same. This is what was done at our site, and we feel it is working out very well. Every home must be retested to make sure the system is working. I was disappointed to learn recently that there is no plan to complete the guidance, despite ongoing technical work and the constructive input from impacted communities. The EPA should organize a genuine national forum that brings vapor intrusion stakeholders from all across the country together with experts and government officials. Last month, I presented to a room full of officials and consultants with 4 other stakeholders. We all provided lots of information and even taught the audience a thing or two. EPA is organizing another forum this fall, but it will again be a handful of community stakeholders with hundreds of paid people in suits, unless EPA provides travel assistance to enable people like me from all over the country to attend. The EPA and others should learn what is important to the people who are affected. Concerns are very different when you walk in our shoes. Congress needs to reinstate the Superfund tax. In the near future, hopefully, we are going to find out what remedies will be used to clean the Hopewell Precision site. But we aren't sure EPA will have the money to implement them. And if we get the money here, it will be at the expense of some other contaminated community. It has been 5 long years already since this began for us. Without enough money, our community will be indefinitely stigmatized. We want action to help us climb out of this hole. We need water immediately. Impacted homeowners, not polluters, deserve property tax relief. Instead of taxing Hopewell Precision, the government is allowing the company to laugh all the way to the bank. It was allowed to lower its property assessment by almost 80% because the property is contaminated because of themselves. The law is different for homeowners. Our assessments are close to those of homes without contamination. Hopewell Precision's large building and 5 acres are being assessed the same as some homes with 1 acre. Please understand that I am not complaining about the work that EPA did here at the Hopewell Precision site. In fact, we are extremely pleased with Angela Carpenter, Lorenzo Thantu, and Don Graham's work. They are reliable, accessible, and personable. It is the policies, procedures, and of course the money that concern us. Thank you for listening. I look forward to hearing how you will take action to address the issues I have raised.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hall. And I failed to say earlier that we'd like you to limit your testimony to 5 minutes, and we will put your entire statement into the record.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. John Hickman.
Yes. Excuse me. Thank you very much. Just a short testimony. Good morning. My name is John Hickman. I'm the supervisor of the town of East Fishkill. I'd like to thank the Congressional Subcommittee on Water Resources and the Environment for meeting here in the town of East Fishkill. The town of East Fishkill has two Superfund sites, one created by a contractor, another created by a business who disposed of cleaning solvents carelessly, possibly criminally, seriously contaminating our groundwater. These activities continued unnoticed for decades, resulting in widespread contamination by TCE, a silent, slow-moving, slow-acting poison that affects unsuspecting people through groundwater contamination and vapor intrusion. To those living in the affected areas, I can only say that people should not have to live such a nightmare. Indeed, the stories that I have heard firsthand of the health and developmental problems of families living in the Ryan Drive Superfund site are truly, truly heartbreaking, and my heart goes out to those so affected. I too would like to commend the EPA on their response. In my capacity, dealing with Lorenzo Thantu and Damien Duda of the EPA on the respective sites, I have found that both treat our citizens with sensitivity and understanding. I would state that the most frustrating part of the process is the time that it takes in analyzing the contamination, providing temporary services, and designing and implementing a remediation plan. It is indeed a long and drawn-out process. I feel that we need stronger regulation and oversight, legislation and enforcement at a higher level of individuals and businesses that use such chemicals so we may prevent more Superfund sites from happening. Prevention of such situations is paramount. Saving people the horrors of living in contaminated sites. In our case, sadly, when damage has been done, we need help in protecting the health of our people and in the remediation of the contamination. The town of East Fishkill does not have the resources to address such issues. I would like to thank the members of the local group, Citizens for Clean Water, for their efforts in bringing the Ryan Drive situation to our attention. I would like to thank the members of the subcommittee for being here today. I would like to thank Congressman Hall and Maurice Hinchey for introducing legislation directing the EPA to set stricter regulations on TCE. We need your help in addressing an issue, not simply of contamination, but of families suffering tragically from daily exposure to TCE. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hickman. We'll now have testimony from Mr. John Degnan, the former mayor of Brewster, Village
Yes,
of
ma'am.
Brewster.
I'd like to thank Congressman John Hall for inviting me here today, our host, Supervisor John Hickman, and the good people of the town of East Fishkill. I'd also like to thank Chairwoman Edie Bernice Johnson and Ranking Member John Boozman and all the members of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure for keeping eyes on the Hudson River Valley and our local challenges for water quality. Brewster is home to a Superfund site. In 1978, Brewster discovered VOCs in its municipal water supply. Investigations discovered a rogue dry cleaner had used a dry well to dispose of his production waste for about 20 years. The dry well was immediately adjacent to the source of the village water supply. The site was placed on the national priorities list of Superfund sites in December of 1982. Shovels in the ground to ensure safe drinking water in Brewster. In 1984, the village, under a cooperative agreement with EPA, installed a full-scale air stripper, which is currently providing safe drinking water to the village residents. A groundwater management system was developed, installed, and fully operational by April of 1997. 4 extraction wells feed a packed column air stripper, treating a volume of about 50 gallons of water per minute. The extracted treated water is discharged into the East Branch of the Croton River, a New York City watershed water body. In late 1991, approximately 160 tons of contaminated soil were removed from the source site. Final confirmation samples showed that the target cleanup goal of 4 milligrams per kilo for PCE in the unsaturated zone was accomplished and acceptable to health standards. In 2007, EPA modified its GMS by adding 2 extraction wells and a new air stripper at the source site. The new stripper continues to extract about 50 gallons per minute and discharges into the same water body. A sub-slab mitigation system was also installed at the source site. My observations. The Village of Brewster, in partnership with the EPA, the DEC, the DEP, and the Putnam County Board of Health, delivers safe drinking water to its residents. Quoting from the 5-year review report prepared by the EPA in 2007, groundwater monitoring results do not indicate that the mass reduction of PCE is occurring at the rate anticipated. The 1986 record of decision estimated 10 years for remediation. Further, the anticipated duration of the pumping to reach maximum contaminated levels is not presently known. PCE levels at the source property continue to exceed safe water drinking standards. Concentrations are generally lower, and they're showing that the remedy is improving. EPA left the door open with their 2000 report. What enhancements should be considered to further remedy the conditions? What are the results of air monitoring in the source building? Soil gas samples suggest that residue source material may remain underneath the building. Has the captured plume moved? Has EPA evaluated the performance of the modified GMS? Does EPA have an action plan? EPA Director of Emergency Remedial Response Division George Pavlou closes his report in 2007 by suggesting that these questions need to be addressed prior to transfer to the state. Documentation and communication. The EPA website is a good source for information. The background and case study are well documented. 2 5-year reports from 2002 and 2007 are readily available to anyone who wishes to review the history. The EPA makes reference to correspondence shared with the Planning Board of the town of Southeast. It is my recommendation that the correspondence generated by the EPA also be shared with the Village of Brewster. My closing comments. In my opinion, the EPA has earned an academic A for taking the lead in protecting the drinking water in Brewster, a grade of B on the 26-year time frame thus far. It took 9 years to get to the source remediation of contaminated soils. A grade of B+ for transparency and recommendations. I asked for a more proactive approach on the part of the EPA in sharing current information. This is the record and the history. From a local stakeholder, I pray that the EPA, in collaboration with its partners, earns excellent grades for the future. Anything else would be irresponsible and a danger to the health of Brewster's people. Thank you for the opportunity to address you today, and I look forward to our collective water quality success stories.
Thank you very much. We will now begin our first round of questions. And mine, Ms. Hall, you made several recommendations. How would you prioritize those recommendations?
First and foremost, the Hopewell Precision site victims. We need to get our water. That's clean water. We don't even know yet where it's going to come from, when. We're into this 5 years, and we've actually been contaminated since the 70s and 80s. The government unfortunately knew that this company, since 1979, had dumped all these chemicals, and an investigation was done, but it was done very poorly. And the site was delisted in '94, saying everything was great. Unfortunately, nobody ever told the residents that any investigation was done at all. And 2 years later, Hopewell Precision bought 48 55-gallon drums, more of TCE. They used it, and there's no record of what they did with the used TCE. Here it happened again. So we want to have our water. We want to be able to sell our homes. We want to be able to turn the faucet on and know that we're protected. It's very hard for people that don't have systems in their home because they don't have that 5 parts per billion threshold, so they're not being protected. And there's at least 12 homes like that I know of. So that would be number one. Number two is the EPA needs to lower the TCE standard. I mean, this should have happened in 2002. We're already 2008, 6 years later, and now they want to start a whole brand new report. And it doesn't make any sense. We have a report already. Let's use that, and if you want to add on to it, we'll add on to it. But why not use what was done, peer-reviewed, all that money went into it, all that time went into it, and it's ridiculous not to use it. Of course, the Superfund tax needs to be implemented again. I mean, to make the people pay for what companies have done is not right. It's just not right. I don't understand why the tax was taken away from these companies. Hopewell Precision has not paid a dime for any of this yet, except to their attorneys. They have not paid one cent. Yet, you know, the people have, you know, and it's just not fair. And residents should, our assessments on our homes, why is it that Hopewell Precision is allowed to lower their assessment by 80% simply because they're an industrial property? They polluted themselves and they're able to lower their assessment because they're polluted. Yet, the people that have the water and the air contamination, they're being told, well, you can't do that because you're residential, you're a whole different thing. We can lower it a little bit, but that's about it. Well, they lowered it by 80%. That's a lot. And a lot of us are paying top dollar on our assessments for the schools, for everything else, and our homes are basically unsellable, and it's not fair. And of course, stakeholders need to be more informed, need to be invited to these conventions that are being held twice a year about vapor intrusion and TCE, and we should be involved more, and we're not.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Hickman, in your testimony, you stated that the most frustrating part of this process is the length of time. And in your view, what is the reason for this process dragging out, and how would you alleviate this?
Well, I think as we all recognize, government does work slowly. I think we've all experienced that. And again, I commend the EPA. I don't know. I think it's between the time of the analysis, and I really can't answer that. I think the EPA would be better suited to answer why it does take several years for remediation. I would just like to say anything the town of East Fishkill could do. We do have water sources not far from there. We'd be more than happy to step in and work with the EPA, and I've made that offer to the EPA. I don't know. I couldn't answer what the holdup is. The EPA is very thorough, and contamination of this manner is a very difficult thing to remediate. Possibly if they did it on a concurrently, remediation and short-term mitigation might be a help. You know, I know you can analyze a problem and try to set up a remediation, but possibly at the same time we could also instigate mitigation. Actually, they have, the POET systems, point of entry treatment systems, have done just that. But I would suggest that possibly we would look for more of a permanent mitigation while we look to remediate the problem. But it's very complicated. We're talking chemicals that are not easily removed from the environment.
Thank you. Mr. Degnan, in your testimony, you noted that the EPA's 2007 report found that the PCE is not being reduced at the rate anticipated. In your view, what next steps need to be taken?
In my view, we have to get much more serious with the source contaminations. It took us 9 years to get to a point where we were remediating soils. As I stated in my testimony, the drinking water is safe in the Village of Brewster. There are 2 packed air column strippers in action right now, and all water extracted from the municipal wells is treated. The second stripper is operated by the EPA, and it is continuing the process of trying to remediate the soils. I am a big proponent of the cooperation between the EPA and the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, where both those agencies work together to come up with conformance-based systems to deal with self-certification of environmental systems, management systems, for dry cleaners, Photoshop printers, and print shops. I believe that these conformance-based systems could be expanded into auto body shops, nail salons, and any other type of business at the local level that is, has the potential to pollute our water systems. So I'd ask that in addition to the good work that these agencies that oversee our water supply bring in enforcing regulatory compliance, also offer tools for conformance-based systems where education, training, and outreach is given to the local stakeholders to educate them as to what the impact of bad business can be when it comes to water pollution. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, in your testimony, you indicated that the past and current water superintendents were not aware of the currency of the status. How do they communicate, or do they communicate?
Up until today's testimony, I have not had the opportunity to meet local representatives from the EPA. I'm proud of the work that I've done in public service in forming relationships with New York City's Department of Environmental Protection, New York State's Department of Environmental Conservation, and the Putnam County Board of Health. I believe that it is the duty of the EPA to take a proactive position when it comes to communication, that to have our superintendents of water not be aware of the actions that took place in 2007 to introduce an air stripper at the source tells me that there's a breakdown in communication. Now again, I think that EPA has done a very good job on their website in providing us the information that we need to stay current. But I'd ask that the communication be more proactive, and I know that the Village Board of Trustees would welcome an opportunity to establish a relationship with local EPA representatives.
Thank you very much. I now call Mr. Bozeman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Have you tried to do that, Mr. Dignan? I mean, you know, you said that you'd like to establish, you know, the local relationship. I mean, have you all asked to meet with them periodically and been refused, or?
We have not been refused.
In
actuality, when I was the mayor in the Village of Brewster, and we received the 2007 review report, I made it my business as mayor to contact EPA, and indeed did talk to staff people and talked about the review report. However, none of the future intentions of the capital expenditures, the actual construction, the relationship with the source site was discussed at that time. And I can assure you, sir, that I'm proactive in my efforts to communicate and form relationships.
No, I don't dispute that at all. And that really is important, is understanding what's going on and, you know, getting input. So that's, you know, maybe it's something that we can help facilitate, which, I guess can you tell us about, you know, this went on, can you tell us about some of the health aspects that maybe some of your folks have experienced, or how did you know this was going on? I mean, what happened?
excuse me, is that a question for myself?
Just for whoever, that somebody can jump in and answer for a minute or
Well, I
so.
would say that when we had the meeting at your house a few weeks ago, and Congressman Hall was there, some of the stories that were told were just, to me, heartbreaking. I couldn't believe that people, and you know, the problem is when you have health issues and you have a Superfund site, you cannot really say this is related to that, but it certainly looks like there is some connection there. And the developmental problems from that one woman, that was just terrible what she was going through with her child. And I spoke to another woman afterwards. I think the occurrences of cancer, it's a very scary thing. And I say to myself every day, how would you feel living there with your family there? And I know, Deborah, you said as get out of this hole or out of this trap. It's a very, very difficult thing for me to comprehend.
When I first found out that we were contaminated, I started going door to door, and people were very open with me and telling me about illnesses that they had or that their family had or that their kids have. And I was hearing a lot of the same things. Some of the people, after getting their water systems in, they feel much better and they're back at work and they're moving on. But there's lots of people with illnesses in the neighborhood, and I did ask the Department of Health to do a health statistics review. Unfortunately, that means it's only statistics. So 43% of the population in the study have never been exposed to the contaminants. This study is done with somebody sitting at a desk in Albany, and they look at census reports of blocks that they have, and that's how they do the study. They don't actually go door to door, talk to the people like I did, so they don't really know firsthand. And I don't think it's a very good way to do a health review. Unfortunately, I'm being told it's the only thing that we have. But there's lots of people don't want to speak out. They either don't want the cameras on them, or they don't want to embarrass their kids. Their kids have gotten better and they've moved on, and they don't want to embarrass them or put any kind of spotlight on their home. So a lot of people are quiet, but they are suffering, lots of them.
Very good. Well, thank you for your testimony. I enjoyed it. It's very helpful. You know, as a person that's directly affected living there, and then you two guys, you know, and fighting the battle, you know, trying to get these problems solved. It's a tough issue, and we appreciate all of you for your advocacy. And like I said, it really is very helpful. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Hall, in your testimony, you detailed the impact that the TCE plume has had on the home assessments and economic fortunes of families in your area. Could you describe whether or not there are any day-to-day costs that are not readily reflected? For instance, we often hear that a gallon of bottled water is as expensive or more expensive than a gallon of gasoline. I can't imagine a family that believes its well may be contaminated with TCE is eager to drink water from the tap. So what kind of day-to-day costs, if any, or inconveniences persist even now as a result of the pollution?
Well, many homes have two systems, one for the water, one for the air. Of course, that's run by electric, and we all know that electric has gone up, you know, a lot. So we have that extra expense. That the home buyer is, or the person living at the home is paying the electric. We are lucky that the EPA does come and they do our water testing. Unfortunately, The people that have only a little bit of contamination, they don't have that. They either have to buy their own system and do the maintenance on that system and do the water testing on that system. And because it's 5 parts per billion, they're not being protected. So either they have to pay a lot of money, like $5,000 just for the system.
Right. Excuse me, I only have 5 minutes, so I'm going to jump in every once in a while.
I'm sorry.
Are you aware of any neighbors who are below that 5 parts per billion who have gone out and bought their own system?
I do.
Do you know how many off the top of your head?
I only know of 2.
How much does a system cost? Like that?
Well, it's probably about $3,000.
So
but-
if you have 4.8 parts per billion, you're probably going to be, your health or your family's health will be affected
You're gonna be-
virtually the same as if it was 5.
Right, you're gonna probably, because the standard should be lower, you're gonna be affected if it's 2.
Right, okay. So the contamination from Hopewell Precision first showed up as a direct water contaminant, but in your testimony you talk about vapor intrusion. How extensive is that threat? Is it growing? And how would you assess the EPA's local efforts to deal with that problem?
The EPA did a fantastic job. They went to many homes, I think over 200, maybe close to 300 homes, and tested. And they did find quite a few homes that had good water but bad air. In fact, the home in the area that had the worst air had perfectly good water. But yet it was still affecting this household. They had a house before they knew about the air. It was known as the sick house, because once they moved in, everybody living there was always sick. And somebody there had gotten prostate cancer, and now that the air system is in, people are not getting sick anymore living in that house. You know, I don't know if it's a coincidence, but I don't think so.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hall.
Thank you.
Mayor Degnan, I was wondering if you could tell us if I gathered overall that your experience, you know, once the air strippers went in, is positive, although it's not improving the site as quickly as it should. Would more air strippers be a help?
Certainly 2007, when EPA installed the air stripper at the source, I'm sure that it will have an impact on accelerating the removal of the contaminants. But keep in mind that it took 9 years to get to a point where we remediated the soils. And this problem was discovered in 1982. Here we are in 2008. And frankly, I understand that the hydrology and the geology of the area make it difficult to map the aquifer. But we don't know if the plume has migrated. And again, we come back to communication of plan of action and in informing the local stakeholders of status and putting people to people together. It has much more potential for alleviating the concerns of the local population.
Right. So you jumped ahead and you answered a question I was going to ask about the plume. There hasn't been a measurement done or any kind of monitoring that shows the size of the plume or migration underground.
Well, there are extraction wells that are tested on a bi-yearly basis, and our water and superintendent, although by Board of Health standards, is supposed to test on a quarterly basis. We're testing on a monthly basis. So all stakeholders involved up to the EPA, I'm sure, realize the severity of this problem.
Right.
What we're really looking for is better communication and a statement of partnership in maintaining the operations and maintenance into the future.
Okay. And under the Massachusetts model that you described, who's responsible for monitoring self-certification, and is there any enforcement mechanism?
Self-certification in the Environmental Results Program, Massachusetts DEP, is an extremely successful program. Prior to implementation of the program, regulatory compliance for the businesses I mentioned were under 10%. within 3 years of the self-certification program, compliance went up over 90%. It's been, from my observations and studies, a very successful program. Now, we all know in this room that if you remove the stick, that there will be people who violate the law and take credit for being in conformance. So there are unannounced audits that take place. And if it's found that one of these businesses is in non-compliance, they are fined and given an opportunity to correct themselves. And this has all got to be documented in part of an environmental management system statement. So again, when it comes to next practices and what the EPA might be contemplating in parallel with their compliance programs, I think that a conformance-based environmental management system that starts from strategies at the top, but also engages resources at the local level that will provide training and education, will go a long way to mitigating issues of water pollution in New York State.
Thank you, sir. And Supervisor Hickman, I'm curious, has the site at Hopewell occupied a significant degree of town time and resources?
It has, excuse me, it's taken somewhat of the many issues that we face on a weekly basis. It does take quite a bit of our time. Again, I say, you know, correspondence with the EPA has been terrific. Their website we found to be very helpful. When the time for assessment came, it took up a significant amount of time for us to try to figure out how to make allowances for contaminated areas compliant with Office of Real Property Taxes. And of course, the issue came up of the Superfund perpetrator who requested the large reduction in their assessed value. So we have sometimes into it. I hate to think about the economic aspect, and when I look at this situation, I focus mainly on the health aspect, and that is really troubling.
Well, certainly the health aspect is the most troubling for all of us, but, you know, as supervisor in a time when everyone is aware of the difficulty and people being able to pay their property taxes and the unpopularity of property taxes, everything you do in the town is paid for that way. So,
Absolutely.
You know, time is money, as they say, and any other resources that you have to put into it. Not to mention that if the assessments at the contaminated sites are decreased, it's in effect it's raising
Other assessments.
the burden on the rest of the town.
Absolutely.
So all this is being done by a corporation which at this point is not being made to pay for it.
It would appear that way, I believe.
I was glad to see you mention the preventative action in your testimony. And resources aside for the moment, what thoughts do you have on specific types of reviews, requests for information, or enforcement actions that would best achieve preventative goals?
Recently, New York State has instituted some laws that we'll be implementing, obviously, through the building department as far as enforcement, registering businesses, which we never had to do before, types of businesses, which will enable us to get a better grasp on the types of potential hazards that we may be facing. So I think that that's a good step. But I would like to see some, on a federal level, licensing of people that use these kind of chemicals. And I think one of the things, well, obviously prevention, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And in this case, as Deborah said, 48 55-gallon drums were not accounted for at the site. So how could that be? So I think this chemical and similar chemicals really need to be certified in their use and in their return. You know, you have to follow them from cradle to grave, as they say. And that we would look to on a federal level, some kind of legislation and enforcement. We certainly don't have the resources, but we will implement on the building department level what we can.
Right. And what's more alarming to me, if I understood Ms. Hall's testimony correctly, was that those 48 barrels, or 48 was it, or 49?
48, 55 gallons?
48, 55 gallon.
Were brought in after the EPA was already aware that there was a problem?
It was brought in 2 years after the DEC had said that everything was fine and dandy with the site, that they did their investigation, and that there was no homes were at risk of any contamination. and that was false.
So EPA had not been involved to your
No,
knowledge?
that was DEC.
And the last question, I guess, to Ms. Hall and Mr. Hickman, has there been any talk that you've heard of air strippers or filtering water from the aquifer the way Mr. Degnan discussed?
I heard that hopefully soon we're going to find out, but I don't know when that will be. I'm just afraid of having a situation like what's going on in Brewster and talk about it 25 years later. I don't want to be here talking about this 25 years later. We shouldn't have to.
No, we should actually be talking about it
Exactly.
now. It should have been already done.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
But my point is just that, and then I'll yield back, but my point is that the closer to the occurrence of the spill that you can take remediative action, the better. The smaller the plume, the better. The less time for the water to migrate, the better.
Right.
I realize that the mile-and-a-half plume at the Hopewell site is going to be very difficult to deal with, but I'm interested to hear what DEC and EPA have to say about the feasibility of
Yeah.
this. Of course, you know, it's obviously going to be expensive in any case, but removing water, filtering it, and then putting the pure water back somewhere would seem to be the ultimate answer if cost were no object. Now, we all know in
doesn't
this
really
day and
work.
age, cost is an object.
Yeah,
It doesn't really
absolutely.
work.
Deborah, do you remember the seminar we went to, the EPA gave the presentation at the school a couple of years ago, and they had, and I give them credit, they had some hydrologists, scientists, and of that nature. I mean, I do think the first thing to do is get you clean water, obviously a source of water. But as far as remediating this chemical, it's a slow-moving, I guess it's a deep, and I think it's a problem, is it in deep wells? It's very
It's-
deep in the water sources.
It's in shallow, it's in deep, it's half a mile wide, a mile and a half long,
And it's-
and still moving.
Still moving.
And there's such an abundance of water, it would take us a century to pump and treat. I
Right.
really don't see it as being something that would be feasible to clean our water.
No, but they did offer a couple other options, if I recall, chemically, but
Right,
again,
but
it's
until
part of
we
the
hear
analysis.
what
yeah.
until I hear what they say, I don't know.
We'll ask the next panel what they think about that. But thank you all for your testimony, and Ms. Hall, thank you for your championing this cause and for all the hard work you've done on it over the years.
Thank you for having this. I appreciate you coming to Hopewell Junction.
Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you. Do you have any further questions? Thank you
very
very much for
Thank you.
coming, and giving us testimony this morning.